Lead Time is a weekly dose of leadership insights and interviews from Tim Allman and Jake Bessling. Lead Time is for any leader living in a busy world looking to be inspired, equipped, and empowered to lead others to their fullest potential. This is Lead Time.
Good day, mate. Good day, Lead Time listeners. I'm Jake Bessling here with Tim Allman, and we are excited that you are listening, no matter where you're listening.
Good day indeed.
We believe that eternities are changed when a leader grows. You've chosen to grow, and it's a time to grow as leaders, especially if you'd pray for your pastors. Easter is coming, and listen up, Easter preachers. Every year it comes. It's always on the calendar. It kind of rotates between late March and mid to late April. Easter. What are you going to preach about? Jesus and the resurrection, of course. But you have people coming from all walks of life, maybe people that check it out once to 3 times a year. What will I say? How will I ooh and awe them? Will I make this scripture come alive? We're going to go back to 1 Corinthians 15 maybe, or are we going to, of course, tell the story of the women coming to the tomb and not finding the body? Are you nervous about preaching for that? Excited about it? It's coming. Or is it? Coronavirus has come, hasn't it?
Yeah.
What's this going to look like?
No idea. I think it's a cool opportunity for us. You got your C&E Christians, Christmas and Easter. Yep. I bet there will be more people tuned in because we've lowered the threshold to take in the beautiful gospel content. So I think now more than ever, regardless of whether we're in a space together, or I heard recently that some churches are exploring, they've got a huge parking lot, bringing people in for drive-in worship as a family. But whether it's on a campus or in a home, this is an opportunity for you to share the gospel, the good news of the crucifixion and then the glory of the resurrection of Jesus.
So listen up, Easter preachers, and if you are not a preacher, this is going to be really applicable to you to learn a little bit more about 6 preaching points for an Easter sermon to talk about the reasons to believe Jesus rose from the dead. That's what Easter is all about, the day in which he rose. We're leaning on a book called The Lynchpin, and it's by Reverend Thomas Zeltz. It's a riveting book. Pick it up. And so we're going to explore those today. We're going to give you 6 of those. There's actually 7 in the book. We're just going to focus on 6. So the first one, Easter preachers, listen up. Movement. A movement has a cause.
So a movement has a cause. Movements have a catalytic event. What was the catalyst? And I'm actually a Civil War buff for 620,000 people dying in the midst of the Civil War. The catalyst movement was human rights matter. Slaves need to not be slaves anymore. People need to be set free. There was an undeniable movement that started some 2,000 years ago that shaped not just Israel and Jerusalem, but had a profound effect from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria to the ends of the earth. And at that time, Rome, kind of the epicenter of the Gentile world, they were the superpower. You see I love the book of Acts because you see Paul's journey from Jerusalem, persecution there, starting a whole bunch of churches in different places for both Jew and Gentile, and then the letter finishes going to Rome. So what led to that movement? Nothing other than
the resurrection of Jesus.
That's right.
And you might be thinking, is there really any evidence that there was a movement that started in Jerusalem that's outside information, outside of the Bible? The answer is yes. I'm going to have to read a little bit here because this is thick information, but and we don't talk this way every day, folks. Tacitus was a senator and historian of the Roman Empire who lived in, get this, AD 50 to 120, so a little after Jesus supposedly, and I believe he did, rose from the grave and then ascended into heaven. His writing examines the reigns of Caesars, Tiberius, Claudius, and Nero, as well as 4 emperors in AD 69. So here's what he wrote. Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations. And who are they? Called Christians by the populace. Christus, we're going to find out that's just a Latin word to say Christ. Christus, from whom the name had its origins, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of their procurators, Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition. I love that. They're calling it superstitious.
And that'd be the resurrection, right?
Yep. thus checked for the moment, again broke out. This movement broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even then in Rome. So why is this important?
Tacitus tells us many things, and Tacitus was not a Christian.
Yeah,
that's
awesome.
kind of wild. He was a historian. So here's what we're told about the movement. The movement was named for its founder, Christus, again, Latin for Christ. It began related to an execution. No one denies the crucifixion of Jesus, carried out between 26 and 36 AD. The movement originated in Judea, and the movement spread all the way to Rome. So the movement had a cause, and we, over the last 2,000 years, say that the cause, the precipitating catalytic event, was the bodily resurrection of Jesus.
And now that movement has over 1 billion, almost 2 billion
That's right.
Christians strong that are following that same one, Jesus Christ. So number one, a movement has a cause. Number two, martyrs. Liars who know they are lying don't become martyrs. This is one of our favorite. I wouldn't either. I'd bail on that thing. This is one of the most favorite points in the book for us. The passion, referred to the suffering of Jesus, the passion that all of the disciples of Jesus who saw him after the resurrection showed, led them all but one, John, to die martyr's death. The one exception was John, who also still refused to denounce the faith, and he lived out his days on an island called Patmos there. Here's the deal. While there are many reasons to be a martyr, dying for a lie that you fabricated is not one of them. You would think the disciples, if it truly was a lie and they start to kill off people, they're like, you know what, whoa, I'm throwing up my hands. This is not true. I was lying. I'm not going to actually believe in this anymore.
So think about the way these martyrs died. Pastor Zilt did a wonderful job. Talking about stoning. What did stone? So Stephen, the first martyr, stoning was considered a vindicta publica, a judgment
You did a good job with that.
by the public, with the crowd participating actually in the execution. The Talmud mentions that the criminal was first to be thrown down from a height, but not so high to be mutilated and killed, usually off a second floor of a building. Then the witnesses had the chance to throw the first large stones or boulders, followed by any people in the surrounding area who would quickly kill the guilty party by stoning him with whatever rocks that they found. And why? And this is a different type of thing, right? It's not just based on an individual. There's corporate responsibility. We collectively are putting this man or this woman to death. And why was Stephen stoned? Because he is claiming that Jesus is the Son of God. To see Jesus is to see God. And he brought a word of law and gospel, the gospel being, and this one whom you killed was raised to life. Amazing.
Yep. So then James, the half-brother of Jesus, who doesn't believe that his half-brother Jesus, while he's on earth, before his death, he's actually the Son of God.
Sibling rivalry.
You're growing
maybe?
up with the brother, and you're like, hey, I'm the Son of God. And he's like, no, you're not. And he doesn't believe it. But after the resurrection, he believes in it. He becomes the bishop of the church in Jerusalem. He writes the letter of James, and he believes. Nathaniel, this guy was filleted to death by a whip in Turkey. Andrew was crucified on an X-shaped cross. He had been whipped severely, then tied to the cross so that his death would be prolonged. He lived for 2 days in that condition, all the while trying to talk from the cross about Jesus to passerbys.
What's amazing about the apostles is that they're getting killed in all of these different ways. Why? Because public execution looked different in all of these different communities. The gospel was going literally to the ends of the earth.
Like India.
You got a guy in India, his name is Thomas, who was stabbed by a spear. Remember, he denied Jesus?
Going from doubting and I got to see him. Yes, he saw him. Then he's stabbed with a spear and killed.
Matthias, the one who took Judas's place as one of the 12, was stoned and beheaded in Rome. Peter was executed in Rome, but he insisted on hanging from a cross upside down. He didn't consider himself worthy to die. Philip was also crucified in the same way.
Get this, nowhere is it ever recorded that any of the eyewitnesses of Jesus Christ said that he had risen from the grave and then went back on their word. They never went back on their word. They always went to their death to say, I actually believe this. I mean, if it was someone that said, I repent of this, I don't actually believe this anymore, the Jews would have had a field day with that.
Oh, man.
They would have caught fire to that and sent it out like, look, these guys are lying. They thought that they believe this, now they don't. And that never happened. So main point.
Yeah, I mean, they died because they touched Jesus. Isn't that cool? The physical evidence. Jesus says, don't just hang out with me, actually touch my side, see my hands. I imagine there was embracing awe and wonder, with the risen Jesus for those 40 days. So those guys started a movement of eyewitnesses giving of their lives. So second point, martyrs. Liars who know that they are lying don't become martyrs. You
Third
wouldn't,
point,
I wouldn't.
Preachers, listen up.
Yeah.
Writings. Jewish writings support the resurrection of Jesus, and that's after the disciples saw what they saw and many years ahead. Now we're going to get kind of intense here with Jewish writings. There are two Talmuds for the Jews.
Jewish writings.
Jewish
right,
writings. One was collated by Jews living in the east of Palestine. The second is known as the Jerusalem Talmud. The Talmud then has two components within it. First, it's what Moses left out of the writings that he didn't include in the Torah, other writings in which he had said different things. The second one is the Gemara, or the commentary on the Mishnah. It's the Tanaitic material. I don't think I said that right.
You did great.
From the rabbis from AD 10 to 220, a long stretch of time there. This particular part of that material from around the time of Jesus talks this way. On the eve of Passover, they're talking about the resurrection and the time of Jesus, more so the death of Jesus.
So hold up, is this connected to Christian
It's not
literature at all?
This
No.
is connected to Jewish writings
Right.
about these events of these so-called Christians. Good point. On the eve of Passover, Yeshua was hanged. Okay, interesting word there. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald went forth and cried out in the city, "He is going forth to be stoned because he practiced sorcery." It's
Sorcery.
Sorcery. What's from?
My
What's that?
Frozen.
Frozen. Sorcery.
I knew something dubious was going on here.
And enticed Israel to apostasy. Anyone who can say anything in his favor, let that person come forward and plead on his behalf. But since nothing was brought forward in his favor, he was hanged on the eve of Sabbath. Now, what does all this mean? Why are we talking about this? How is it relevant?
A few points. This gives support to Jesus being a real person who was executed by the Jews and the Romans. It supports that he was well known, and it was known in advance that the Jerusalem religious leaders were hoping to have him killed. All very consistent with scriptures, right? The reason he was to be executed was that he practiced sorcery. Meaning he practiced miraculous works.
But a lot of times in that time it was like known by the devil. Like if you're doing these things by
Right.
the devil, Jesus even had people count that out.
Exorcisms, right? Supernatural work. So it gives support to Jesus doing his miracles.
It supports that his death was during the time of the Passover. So that is in line with what Scripture says. So here it is. It says in there he was hanged, okay? There were 4 ways of execution noted in the Talmud for the Jews: stoning, burning, hanging, and slaying by the sword. Technically, hanging was a post-mortem, hanging of a person stoned to death in order to display the criminal, to show that and ward off people doing the same thing. This article mentioned both stoning, then hanging. Why? It likely refers to him being killed by crucifixion. Follow me here. This shift in language must have meant that sometime in the carrying out of his summons, the plan changed. The method of execution shifted from a Jewish form of execution, stoning, and then it says later in the article, to one used by the Romans, which would be actually crucifixion. Since the Jews did not crucify, the Romans did, who used crucifixion. Why is that form of killing not mentioned, though? Because it does end with saying more about being hanged. Because the Jews did want to take credit for the execution. They wanted to claim responsibility for Jesus' death. We did our job. Now he's dead. We hung him up.
There's so much there. The human dynamic, and then as centuries, because this material came out, decades and even a couple centuries after Jesus.
Finalized in 220.
Shifting some of the responsibility. We weren't cowards, like the story says. You take him. We don't want we don't want anything to do with it. So quite fascinating. Then in the Toledoth, Yeshu is an anti-Christian Jewish writing. They try to explain why the tomb was empty. That means that they're in agreement that the tomb was empty at this point. And there's great debate. And early on, you've got the lie being told by the Jews. Matthew references this. What is the lie, Jake? That the disciples came and they stole the bodies. So bodies would be embalmed for up to a year on a porch bench within a tomb. I think many of you have heard about this. And then as it decomposed, the bones would have been put into little boxes called ossuaries. This story mentioned that the sages removed his body, tied it to the tail of a horse. So they had all these kind of crazy stories about what happened to the body.
Fill in the gaps.
So here it is, tied it to a horse and transported it to the queen, which is silly. Why? Because if that was true, they would have been able to actually produce a body, and the movement would have no doubt stopped immediately. Right? You think of, and sorry to get so graphic here, but John the Baptist, I want to know the job has been done. So bring me his head on a platter, right? There's no story of the body at all ever being found. And you see decades and maybe even a couple centuries later, the Jews kind of reeling to say, no, there was a body and this is it. Well, where's the proof? Where's the proof? There was no proof. So Jewish writings support the resurrection of Jesus.
Number 4, preachers, listen up. Chapel, the chapel of the Holy Sepulchre. I've never been to Jerusalem. Neither has Pastor Tim. I know Pastor Jeff has, and many other people out there.
We'll get there.
Yeah. And you'll see at the chapel of the Holy Sepulchre, apparently it's just it seems like put together kind of raw stone that's shown, small hallways, many different levels. And here's why. The Chapel of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem is a site to which most scholars believe is both the place where Jesus died for his crucifixion, and then close by was the tomb as well. Little history about the chapel to help us understand why this would be proof and evidence about the resurrection. And honestly, it's a place then that we can say this is really where it happened. Constantine erected a church and a monument to Jesus here when he became Christian in AD 335. Since this is 300 years, though, after Jesus was resurrected, how did he know where to build? And so here's some history on where he knew how to build.
So Constantine's mother, Helen, visited Jerusalem from Rome and asked to be taken to the place of Jesus' tomb. She was led to the site of a Roman-built temple and a shrine to Aphrodite. It was inside the walls of the city of Jerusalem, which was very strange since the rabbinic teaching was that carcasses, graves, and tanneries may not remain within a space of about 50 cubits from the town. So the New Testament places Jesus' death and resurrection outside of the walls of the city. So help us take a step back, help us understand this, Jake. Why does this matter, man?
Before Jesus, this site that we're talking about, the Holy Sepulchre, was a quarry for limestone for building inside the city. Quarries provided exceptional rock-hewn cliff faces into which you could excavate a cave complex to place the dead. So then they had the tomb there as well. 10 years after Jesus, Herod Agrippa extended the city of Jerusalem by building a wall that now brought the site of the Holy Sepulchre into the new city territory that you would visit today. Nothing was first built here, but Christians would gather in that space years after, but very soon, within a decade of Jesus' resurrection. They'd gather there on Sundays to worship. Wow. In AD 132, Emperor Hadrian kicked out all the Jews and banned them from Jerusalem. So he kicks out all the Jews. He took this site over, and this is important because he's helping us keep this place solid, and he actually makes a shrine to Aphrodite. What did that do? It preserved the space, and it marked its location. 200 years after this event, is when Helen, Constantine's mom, was led to the site to be shown what they were saying was the exact location of Jesus' tomb. What does this prove? That at this site that millions of Christian pilgrims visit every year has been preserved throughout all time over the last 2,000 years since the first century to celebrate a guy they believe was crucified and buried right there and then rose again, and we can't find his body.
So fourth point, the chapel, the Holy Sepulchre, easy for me to say, not. You got to go there. When we go to Jerusalem, you got to get to this chapel. Unbelievable. All right, the third one, Sunday. I like this one. The shift from Sabbath Saturday to Sunday. This is number 5. Still today in Jerusalem, it is illegal to work if you are an Orthodox Jew from sundown Friday through sundown on Saturday. It's even illegal to push the button on it. There's all these laws, right? Even today.
There's an elevator apparently that just goes to each floor. You got to stop. I take the stairs.
Yeah. It's illegal to even push the button on the elevator. So the elevator stops floor by floor. We would take a breather. All right, in the first century, it cannot be overemphasized that the Sabbath was most important. It was woven into the fabric of creation by God before the fall of mankind. The seventh day, the Shabbat, has never wavered.
I mean, in the Talmud, it lists 39 activities that are prohibited. Sewing, erasing, gluing. Even if your house is on fire, you can't extinguish it unless someone's inside of it.
Come on, man.
Shabbat Saturday is actually the only name of the week in Hebrew that has a name with words. The rest of the days of the week are named with numbers. That's interesting. So it's a high importance. Like, it's so valuable. You could be stoned to death if you disobeyed this law. Now, in light of all of that, why would a band of Jews who grew up Jewish abandon all of that to face that type of persecution to worship Jesus on Sundays?
Now, at first, for a while, they did continue to honor Saturday Sabbath, but then also met on Sundays, and they began to call it the Day of the Lord. None of the religious leaders of the day honored Sunday as holy, the Jewish leaders. Sunday was the new day that for the Christians was of primary importance for this group. Why? Because Jesus was raised on a Sunday. And what makes the evidence for the resurrection that much more profound is that the Jews continue to hold Sabbath, but the Christians continued to look to Sunday as the new day of worship. It was a huge, huge shift. This point number 5, Sunday, the shift from Sabbath, Saturday to Sunday. And we preserve that today, but here's the reality. Every day, every day is a day to worship the risen Jesus, but every Sunday that we gather together, whether it's online or in space, is a celebration of the pinnacle point of our whole Christian faith, the bodily resurrection of Jesus.
Every Sunday is a mini Easter, and where 2 or 3 or more are gathered, it's Easter time.
Amen.
The 6th one and the final one, preachers listen up, is the creed, the early Christian creed. Now, we're not talking about talking about what will develop into the Apostolic and the Nicene and the Athanasian Creed, those 3 creeds. But where does that kind of literature come from? The thought process there. A big argument skeptics have made before is that the Christian faith evolved through the centuries, first 2 centuries, and that it was only after a couple hundred years that Jesus was then developed into one that would die and rise again and be the Son of God. But none of these arguments work when comparing to the actual historic record of the beginning of Christianity. And we're going to lean on 1 Corinthians in the Bible, chapter 15, verses 3 to 5.
So 1 Corinthians 15 is something you need to internalize, meditate on, especially as we move into the Easter season. If the Christian faith did, in fact, evolve, then we should be able to trace its evolutionary development. For example, the movement's earliest writings might depict Jesus as a misunderstood teacher. I like that. Just pause right there. Who do people say that I am? Some say that you're a teacher, a prophet, okay? But later, it might then evolve to show that he was a miracle worker. Then, after the myth develops after a significant period of time, it might move, the writings might say that he's a divine and superhuman. So we see this kind of evolutionary movement of the way people could have viewed Jesus, teacher, miracle worker, God.
And a lot of times, other myths develop that way. But here's the thing. If, on the other hand, the earliest writing presented Jesus in all of those ways, which it did, then we're on to something here. 1 Corinthians seems to have been written actually about 55 AD. The earliest surviving manuscripts is from AD 180, but it's quoted by other writings even much earlier than 180. No reason to question that it was written in the first century, and most likely within, by Paul, 25 years of Jesus' resurrection. Here's what he says in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 3. For what I received, I pass on to you as of first importance. So I've received it. Now I pass it on to you, Corinthians, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, Old Testament, that he was buried, a life event. He was buried, put in the tomb, that he was raised on and then this is interesting, on the third day, according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. Catch the words received and pass on. These words refer to receiving information in stock, set form, and passing it on to exact form. Even those words in Greek, received and pass on, mean that you're receiving info and you're giving it A to A, not A to B, A to A, like it's the exact replica of what it would be.
Yeah, think of some more recent exhortations or speeches that have been ingrained in our heads, even from a young age, 7 years ago. As a homeschool kid, I remember that being, that's Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address. Or
How about this one?
I have a dream. I have a dream. Yeah, Martin Luther.
Right? Paul is saying these things in 1 Corinthians. Jesus died for our sins. He was buried. He rose from the dead on the third day, and he was seen alive by Peter and the 12. How early then is this legitimate statement of faith that Paul is passing on in AD 55 in this letter?
So assuming, we're going to get a little technical here with some dates, assuming that the year of Jesus' death was around AD 30, Paul's conversion to Christianity would have been around AD 33 to 36. So Paul then visited Jerusalem specifically to meet, and this is what Acts says, specifically to meet with Peter and James 3 years after his conversion. So the earliest for Paul to receive this stock creed would have been between AD 36 and 38. He was also in Jerusalem before he visited Corinth in AD 50. This means that Paul received this creed from Jerusalem and the apostles there sometime between AD 36 and 50. So what conclusions can we draw from this?
The faith that grew out of Jerusalem had from its inception the belief that Jesus rose from the dead. We didn't have to wait 200 or 300 years for someone to make it up or find it. This belief was clearly standardized. Is that right? Standardized. There it is. In this creed form in 1 Corinthians before Paul even had it. He received it from these other brothers that had experienced it. It is impossible to argue that then, based on this evidence, that the belief in the resurrection of Jesus came into being years later. It was there from the beginning because it was true. Creeds, the early Christian creed.
And I mean, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, Athanasian Creed, those are the ones that have normalized us as the church over the last almost 2,000 years, right? But even in our preaching, think of the gospel. Who is Jesus and what did he do? He is the Son of God, and then we even have some kind of formulaic ways that we talk about it. Who lived a perfect life on our behalf. He died our death on the cross. He was buried in the tomb, and then 3 days later, he rose from the grave. He hung out for 40-some days with his apostles. He ascended, and he's going to come back. So this is a creed that all Christians should internalize and then share. And it comes right from the first eyewitnesses, the early Christians there in Jerusalem and across the known world. Amazing.
The evidence is just overwhelming that Jesus actually walked the earth. He died in an actual place. We can't find his body. Why? Because he ascended into heaven. So preachers, think about these as you look to preach the gospel of Jesus this Easter. 1, movement.
A movement has a cause. 2, martyrs. Liars who know they are lying don't become martyrs. 3, writings. Jewish writings support the resurrection of Jesus.
Chapel. Remember the chapel of the Holy Sepulchre where we know that Jesus died and rose again. Sunday. The shift from, the shift from Sabbath Saturday to these Jews saying, I'm worship on Sunday. And then the creed, the early Christian creeds. We don't know what Easter is going to look like. different places, maybe online. Maybe we do, maybe I pray that's the first time we all get to gather back together.
So if you are a preacher or think about your home right now. I want to have deep conversation with my kids, moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas. I want to have deeper conversations because there may be some content coming to you, but then we want to go deep. These show notes will be on our website, leadtime, cglchurch.org /leadtime, where we took Zelt's wonderful book. We've condensed it there for you, and you can go deep into all of these wonderful 6 points for the veracity. We don't use that enough.
Veracity.
Of the bodily resurrection of Jesus. Thanks for joining us on Lead Time.
By Lynchpin, by his book.
Yes, sharing is caring. Get the word out about what Jesus is doing, especially through these uncertain times. We know the certainty of Jesus who lived, died, and rose again. Peace of the Lord.
Happy Easter.
Yeah, baby. Happy Easter. Christ is risen.
Indeed, hallelujah.
Ooh.
You have been listening to Lead Time with Tim and Jake. Please subscribe at cglchurch.org /leadtime. Thanks for listening. Tune in next Monday for another episode.